Learning how to use layers is probably the most important thing you can do to improve your Adobe Photoshop skills. You can think of layers as transparent panes of glass stacked on top of one another. This allows different parts of each layer to show through. You can view, create, and edit layers with the Layers panel. This generally will be found in the lower right corner of the screen, although you can always go to Window and then down to Layers to make sure that it's turned on. There are several types of layers that you'll use in Adobe Photoshop, and they fall into two main categories: content layers and adjustment layers. Please note that the order of your layers is very important. If you add in a content layer, you may not be able to see your previous adjustment layers. You can rename your layers so that you know the specifics about what edits and adjustments were made. When using layers, it may be helpful to turn individual layers on and off to see how they affect the image. You can do this by clicking the eye icon next to each layer name. If you find that you no longer need a layer, you can delete it. To do this, simply select the layer and press the Delete key on your keyboard. You can also click and drag the layer to the trash can in the lower right corner, or select the layer and click the trash can icon. You can find a wide variety of adjustment layers in the Adjustments panel. Let's take a look at a few different ways to adjust and correct the tones and color in an image. One way is to use the Brightness Contrast Adjustment layer. This is a very simple and quick technique to make the overall image brighter or darker and to make the contrast more or less intense. Preview any changes by clicking on and off the eye icon. Another way to adjust the tonal range of your image is to use the Curves Adjustment layer. When you open up Curves, you will be presented with a histogram depicting the tonal range. If the graph leans more to the left, the image is generally darker, and if the graph leans more to the right, the image is generally brighter. You can move the black and white sliders to make somewhat extreme adjustments, but another way is to put points on the graph. These points can be moved to make slight adjustments to different areas of the image. You can also use the eyedropper tool to make very specific points. Click the letter I on the keyboard to access this tool quickly. While holding Control or Command on a Mac, click different areas of the image. This will create points on the graph. If you don't like a certain selection point, you can remove it by dragging it off of the histogram. You can also adjust the tonal range of the image using levels. Like curves, levels presents you with a histogram of the image, although it is a bit more simple to use. You can use the black slider to adjust the shadows, the white slider to adjust the highlights, and the gray slider to adjust the midtones. You can also use levels to adjust the color of the image. Adobe Photoshop uses the RGB model, or additive colors, red, green, and blue. It assigns an intensity value to each pixel. When RGB is selected, adjustments are made to all of the colors in the image. When correcting the color of the image, you will want to change it to red, and while holding the Alt key, or the Option key on a Mac, move the black slider until black begins to show, and then move the white slider until red begins to show. You'll repeat this step for green and for blue. When completed, the image should have a nice color correction. There are a lot of fun ways to adjust your photographs in Adobe Photoshop. Let's explore a few of the adjustment layers that can add our own style and creativity to our image. One thing you can try is the Hue Saturation Adjustment layer. Saturation is the color intensity, and this adjustment can increase or decrease it. Hue is color. Red and blue are both hues. When you click Colorize, your image will become monochrome, meaning one color. You can select whichever hue you want your image to be. You can also modify selected areas of saturation in your image by selecting this hand tool and clicking on a color. While holding down, you can move to the left to decrease intensity and to the right to increase intensity. The color balance adjustment layer can also be fun to try out on your images. First, select which tone you want to adjust, the highlights, the midtones, or the shadows. Then, you can use the sliders to adjust that specific tone. Try adjusting the color in all three tones to make a really interesting color scheme. The selective color adjustment layer has a lot to offer. When using this adjustment layer, you'll want to think about what colors are prevalent in your photograph. Select a color you want to adjust and then move the sliders to selectively colorize them. Ultimately, don't be afraid to try any of the adjustment layers. If you don't like how one is turning out, you can just uncheck the eye icon or delete it from the Layers panel. Converting your image to black and white can add a whole new feeling to your photograph. You can quickly make your image black and white by using the Hue Saturation Adjustment layer and taking the saturation all the way down to 0. You can also make your image sepia toned by colorizing your image with an orange or yellow hue and then lowering the saturation. Another way to convert your image to black and white with a little bit more control is to use the black and white adjustment layer. It will automatically make your image black and white, but if needed, you can further adjust the different tones in the image to make certain areas darker or lighter. Again, remember to have fun with these edits and to try some new things.